The old Grand Blackwood Hotel stood on a hill overlooking the town. It was a spooky place. People told stories about it. They said it was haunted. Nobody dared to stay there anymore. One night, a group of friends decided to explore the abandoned hotel. They were looking for adventure. They wanted to see if the stories were true. They shouldn't have gone inside. The friends walked slowly through the dusty lobby. Cobwebs hung from the chandeliers. The air was thick and stale. It smelled like something had died in there. It probably had. They stopped in front of a dusty elevator. The doors hung open like a gaping mouth. They decided to take the stairs. They walked up creaking staircases. Each step seemed to echo forever. They finally reached the third floor. The hallway was dark, lit only by a flickering light. It made strange shadows dance on the walls. They stopped in front of room 318. The door was slightly open. "This is it," whispered Jake, his voice trembling. "This is where it happened." The friends peered inside. The room was dark and dusty. There was a musty smell like old perfume and fear. They felt a chill, even though it was a warm summer night. "What happened here?" asked Emily, her eyes wide with fear. "They say a girl named Mary died in this room," whispered Jake. The room was filled with an eerie silence, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The friends huddled closer together, their faces illuminated by the flickering candlelight. She was a beautiful girl, but vain. Mary was known for her beauty, and she took great pride in it. She would spend hours in front of her mirror, admiring her reflection, lost in her own world. She used to stare at herself in the mirror all day long. It was as if the mirror held some kind of spell over her, drawing her in deeper and deeper with each passing day. "What happened to her?" asked Ben, his voice barely above a whisper. The room seemed to grow colder as he spoke, the shadows on the walls dancing menacingly. "Nobody knows for sure," said Jake. His eyes darted around the room as if expecting Mary's ghost to appear at any moment. "Some say she died in an accident, a tragic car crash that left her lifeless body sprawled on the road, her once beautiful face now unrecognizable. Others say it was..." He paused. The tension in the room was palpable, each friend holding their breath, waiting for Jake to continue. "They say it was the mirror. The very mirror she spent so much time gazing into, the one that seemed to hold her captive." They all stared at the old tarnished mirror in the corner of the room. It seemed to beckon them, its surface dull and covered in a thick layer of dust. It was covered in dust, but they could still see their reflections, faint and ghostly. Their faces looked back at them, distorted and eerie. "They say, if you stand in front of the mirror and say her name 3 times, she'll appear," whispered Jake. His voice trembled slightly, betraying his own fear. "They say she'll show you how you're going to die." The thought sent shivers down their spines, the idea of seeing their own death too terrifying to comprehend. "Don't be ridiculous," said Emily, but her voice shook. She tried to sound brave, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. "I dare you to do it, Jake," said Ben, a sly grin spreading across his face. The challenge hung in the air, daring anyone to take it up. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows closing in as they waited to see who would be brave enough to face the mirror. Jake hesitated. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in the silence of the room. The dim light cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the room feel even more foreboding. He looked at his friends, then back at the mirror. The reflection showed their anxious faces, eyes wide with a mix of fear and anticipation. The mirror seemed to hold secrets, dark and unfathomable. The dare hung in the air, heavy and ominous. It was a challenge none of them wanted to accept, yet the thrill of the unknown was too tempting to resist. "Fine," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The words seemed to linger in the air, adding to the tension that already filled the room. "But you have to do it with me." His eyes darted between his friends, seeking their support and courage. Ben and Emily exchanged nervous glances. They could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on them, but the bond of friendship and the fear of being labeled a coward kept them from backing out. They knew it was a bad idea, but none of them wanted to back down. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with anticipation and dread. They stepped inside the room. The floorboards creaked under their weight, each step echoing in the silence. The door creaked shut behind them, sealing them in. The sound was final, like the closing of a coffin. They were plunged into darkness. The blackness was so complete it felt like a physical presence, pressing in on them from all sides. "I can't see anything," whispered Emily, her voice trembling. The darkness seemed to amplify her fear, making it palpable. Ben pulled out his cell phone and switched on the flashlight. The small beam of light cut through the darkness, offering a small measure of comfort. The room was illuminated in a pale, blue light. The shadows danced on the walls, creating eerie shapes that seemed to move on their own. Dust motes danced in the beam, adding to the surreal atmosphere. It was as if the room itself was alive, watching them. They huddled closer together, their hearts pounding in their chests. The fear was a tangible thing, wrapping around them like a cold, clammy blanket. They could feel the presence of something unseen, something cold and menacing. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. The air grew colder and a shiver ran down their spines. They knew they were not alone. "Ready?" whispered Jake. His voice was dry with fear. Emily and Ben nodded, their eyes fixed on the mirror. They took a deep breath and began to chant, "Bloody Mary! Bloody Mary! Bloody Mary!" The air grew cold. A chill ran down their spines. The cell phone flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. A low moan echoed through the room. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The friends huddled closer together, their breath catching in their throats. "Did you hear that?" whispered Emily, her voice trembling. "It's just the wind," said Ben, but his voice sounded unsure. Then they saw it. A faint light appeared in the mirror. It grew brighter, slowly illuminating the room in a sickly yellow glow. A figure began to form in the mirror. It was a young woman with long black hair and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. Her face was pale and gaunt, her lips drawn back in a terrifying grin. Blood dripped from her fingertips. Her white dress was stained crimson. She reached out from the mirror, her long, sharp nails scraping against the glass. The friends screamed and stumbled back in terror. They turned to run, but the door was gone. The windows were gone. They were trapped. The figure in the mirror laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound that seemed to echo through their bones. She was getting closer. "Let us out!" screamed Emily. "Please, let us out!" But the figure just kept laughing. Her eyes glowed brighter, burning into their souls. They could feel her icy breath on their skin. Jake grabbed Emily and Ben's hands. "We have to get out of here!" he yelled. He pulled them toward the corner of the room. They huddled together, their backs against the wall, their eyes fixed on the terrifying figure in the mirror. They were trapped, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The figure reached out from the mirror, its form barely distinguishable from the shadows that danced around it. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with an unspoken dread. Her long, sharp nails grazed Emily's arm, leaving a trail of icy fear in their wake. Emily could feel the cold seeping into her bones, a chill that seemed to come from another world. Emily screamed and pulled away, her voice echoing off the walls. The sound was swallowed by the oppressive darkness, leaving only the memory of her terror hanging in the air. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. It was as if it had never been there, leaving behind only a lingering sense of unease. The light in the mirror faded, the glass returning to its mundane reflection. But the room felt different now, as if it had been touched by something otherworldly. The room was plunged into darkness once more, the faint light from the mirror gone. The friends were left in a void, their senses heightened by the absence of light. The friends were left trembling in the darkness, their breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. They huddled together, seeking comfort in each other's presence. They could still feel the icy touch of the figure on their skin, a reminder of the encounter that had just transpired. The cold seemed to cling to them, refusing to let go. They could still hear her blood-curdling laughter echoing in their ears, a haunting melody that seemed to come from the very walls around them. It was a sound that would stay with them long after the night was over. "It's gone," whispered Ben, his voice shaking. "It's finally gone." But even as he said the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them. He fumbled for his cell phone and switched on the flashlight, the small beam of light cutting through the darkness. It was a fragile barrier against the unknown, but it was all they had. The pale light flickered to life, illuminating their terrified faces. They looked at each other, their eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. The light cast long shadows on the walls, making the room seem even more sinister. "Where's Sarah?" whispered Emily, her eyes wide with fear. The question hung in the air, unanswered and unsettling. They all knew the implications of her absence. They looked around the room, their eyes straining to see in the dim light. But Sarah was nowhere to be seen. It was as if she had been swallowed by the darkness itself. She had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the memory of her presence. The room felt emptier without her, a void that seemed to echo with the silence of her absence. The friends knew that their lives would never be the same again, haunted by the mystery of Sarah's disappearance. The friends stumbled out of the room and into the hallway. They ran through the dark and silent hotel, their screams echoing through the empty corridors. They never looked back. They never spoke of what they had seen that night, but they never forgot. And they knew, deep down in their hearts, that Sarah was gone forever, claimed by the vengeful spirit of room 318. They knew that they would never be truly free from the horrors they had witnessed that night. They were forever haunted by the legend of Bloody Mary.